starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Society of Wetland Scientists January webinar. My name is Jillian Davies and I'm your moderator. We have a great turnout for today's event and I'm looking forward to announcing the topic and presenter for our February webinar later in the program. The SWS webinar program has proven to be a great addition to our membership benefits list, and I'm excited about the opportunity to provide our members with more great educational content as we move through the rest of the year. The general format of today's webinar will be a 40 to 45-minute presentation by our speaker, followed by approximately 15 minutes of questions from the participants. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping announcements. Just to familiarize you with the GoToMeeting screens, there's an attendee control panel where you can control the audio for the webinar by using your telephone or mic and speakers. At any time during the presentation, you can type your questions into the questions pane. Our presenter will be answering questions at the end of his presentation. I want to note that all attendee phone lines are on mute to cut out background noises and distractions. This webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a link to the recording following the webinar. We also ask that you take a moment to complete the evaluation survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. This will help us to plan future events. If you'd like a copy of today's slides, please find a PDF copy in the handout section of the control pane. Please use hashtag SWSwebinar to tweet about today's webinar. We love seeing what you have to say about the event. Let's test the questions pane and at the same time get a little demographic info by having everyone type the state or country you're participating from and how many people are viewing the webinar with you. Great, I see some names from Bangkok, Massachusetts, Washington State, Colorado, Pittsburgh, Plymouth, Mass, Charleston, South Carolina, Florida, California, Baltimore, Rochester, New York. Great. With the logistics out of the way, let's get started with our webinar. It's my pleasure to welcome today's presenter, Dr. Li-Feng Li. Dr. Li was the director of WWF Global Freshwater Program from 2008 to 2016 and led WWF's work on freshwater conservation in many of the world's large rivers, including the Amazon, Rio Grande and Rio Conchos, Amur, Yangtze, Mekong, Ganges, Indus, Danube, Balkan rivers, and Zambezi. He has worked on water and river basin management at WWF since 2002 and was the leader of WWF's work on basin management in China and restoration in the central Yangtze. Welcome, Li-Feng. I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Jillian, for your nice introduction, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be able to share some of the work that I involved in the past few years, which is above the river flows. And in my presentation, I will share with you some of the work that's WWF and myself will be involved, but also share other examples and to explore the opportunity with all of you, then how we can really address these issues in the future. I started with this lovely photo, and which really can tell the story of the river flows and why it is important for the species like the salmon. But in general speaking, the river flows or environmental flows is quite a relatively a new concept. It's only in about 10 years ago that the scientists gathered together and then agreed on this terminology in the Brisbane Declaration. In that year, at the International River Symposium, I think it's got about more than 700 scientists from all over the world gathering together in Brisbane and discussed, the definition, but also share some of the experience and also identify the potential solutions how the environmental flows could be maintained, could be restored in the rivers that we are facing. And in the short term, from this definition, you can clearly to say that's the major three elements in the definition when we talk about the environmental flows. It's the water quality, it's water quantity, and the water timing. And this definition also recognizes the flows are important not only for the species, for the ecosystems, but also for the human that live upon those systems. Environmental flows from this figure, if we look at the hydrographic of the natural river, very often we have the hydrograph like this. A natural river normally get different flow pattern throughout the year, and there's some dry seasons where the flow is very low, and then that's that's wet seasons when the flow is quite high, and also very often that's like a flooding season. Sometimes it's happened once or twice or different quite a few times during the year. And then from the ecological perspective, each of the flow event, whether it's high flow or low flow, are very important, to the species, to the habitats, to the ecological process in the river system. For example, if it's really during the low flow season, then the fish can still, have adequate, oxygen and nutrient to survive in the water body. At the same time, the other, ecological process happening, around the water and in the riparian systems. And then during the high flow season, then the fish can migrate, between the mainstream and the floodplain. Very often it's their spawning season, or it's also timing that the fish can feed themselves well and then be able to regenerate themselves. And that's also mean differently to the other species, whether it's insects or the wading birds. So the flows have a really important in terms of the whole ecological process in the river system. It's also important for other systems, not only for the rivers. And the salmon is the example that the rivers can really connect the inland freshwater systems and the oceans, and the forest in the floodplains. It is also important from the social perspective that the river flows really connect the different communities who live, along the river. This photo shows, in some countries, I think it's probably from Asia, the countries that even organize the event like the Dragon Boat Festival to celebrate a functioning and a healthy river. So it's also keep the flows, keep the river flowing. It's also very important from a social perspective. And we all know that freshwater fishery, it's one of the major livelihood that people depends on. For example, the people in the Mekong countries, they rely on the Mekong River system to provide millions of tons of freshwater fishery, and which really account for 80% of the animal proteins that the people have there. But generally speaking, freshwater or inland water fishery has been always underestimated, although they are such important, especially in the developing world, where the people really rely on the inland fisheries. And to have a sustainable inland fishery in business and flow is always one of the most important ecological phenomena that will sustain the inland fishery in these rivers. Despite the importance, I guess, try to understand the river system. It's challenging because every river is dynamic. Every river got its own characters, and also to understand the river system is also took very long-term effort in terms to get the data, analyze them, and then be able to really to understand the river systems. And one of the major challenges nowadays is we are facing the rivers that have been so much disrupted by human activities. And this is some data that was released in a report of WWF in 2006. Which is really have sort of a snapshot of the larger rivers of the world, the larger rivers that are longer than 1,000 kilometers. You can say in different regions the relatively there's still some rivers are still free flowing, and after 177, that's only 64 still were free flowing. And the regions like in Asia or South America, it's probably percentage-wise they got much more rivers still haven't been disrupted, haven't been dammed yet. However, we also realize that more rivers are facing the huge development pressure, and 17 of them might be dammed in the near future. This map is it's built upon the paper that's published by the scientist. So the red dot are the planned dams, and then the green dot are the existing dams or the dams under construction. You can see while in the in the US, most of the places, most of the good sites for dam construction have been already developed. Then in Africa or in Latin America, in the Balkans or in the Himalayas, these are really the hotspot for hydropower development that's projected by 2050. If I could share with you the example in the Upper Yangtze, sorry, this map is in Chinese. So in the Upper Yangtze, from all different colors of the dots, you can imagine that lots of dams, will be built. So the red one, the red dots, present the existing ones, and then the purple one are the one that's under construction, and then the blue one are planned dams for the future. But in any case, you can say the river system in the Upper Yangtze area have been significantly impacted by human activity like the dam construction. I think largely because of that, if you notice in the latest Living Planet report that was released last September, the Living Planet index in the freshwater ecosystems declined 81% between 1970 to 2012. This is the index that's calculated based upon the data of 3,324 populations of 881 freshwater species. So it's really the common crisis that we are facing today. Compared to other biomes, the terrestrial Living Planet Index declined 38% during the same time frame. The marine LPI declined 36%. The overall LPI declined 58%. So freshwater ecosystem, from our perspective, it's really advanced. We really need the joint effort from the society. Really need to raise the awareness and then be able to help the others to understand the crisis, because freshwater species is much less sexy than many of the mammals or the dolphins in the ocean system. It's very difficult to get the attention of the society. If we look at what are the potential solutions, at least from the WWF perspective, we try to work on those few issues. For example, we try to work with the scientists, but also work with local communities, basin organizations, water resource management authorities to understand and also to assess the environmental flows, what kinds of environmental flows are needed for different freshwater ecosystems, not only for rivers but also for wetlands, for example, for lakes. Secondly, we also try to identify the opportunities where we could restore, for example, the river connectivity. And then thirdly, it's really a exciting new area, how we could help the operators to manage and reoperate some of the existing dams and infrastructures, so that to be able to restore the environmental flows. Fourthly, we also look at the big picture, how the environmental flows could be guaranteed, could be maintained through the integrated basin planning process. Last but not least, we also explore the opportunities to mainstream environmental flows into national and global policies. So in the rest of my presentation, I will share with you some of the work we've done around those 5 areas, but also be able to pick up some other examples that other organizations have been leading. The first one regarding I couldn't get my next slide. Yeah. The first area regarding understand and assess the environmental flows. So we have published a very short primer we called Keeping Rivers Alive, which is really sort of a translation of the scientific language into commonly understood language to talk about what is the environmental flows and why it is important and then how it could be achieved. And then we also have been working in a couple of countries, for example, in Kenya, in the Mara River, to assess the flow, requirement and how to balance the agricultural development and nature conservation needs. The other example, for example, the environmental flow assessment in the Upper Ganga Basin, which the area doesn't have much data. So in that kind of data pool area, we involved both scientists but also the communities to conduct such environmental flow assessment. We have other examples, but those examples, those reports could be downloaded from WWF website. In the second area, find opportunities to restore the river connectivity. Here's the example I would like to share with you. Is the work that's have been done by us, over around 15 years in the central part of the China, in the central and the lower Yangtze River Basin. And in this part of the Yangtze River Basin, it has the largest freshwater lake of China, which is the Poyang Lake. And it used to be the area that have thousands of lakes that have naturally connected with the Yangtze River. However, due to the development largely in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s during the last century, many of those lakes have been disconnected, have been disconnected from the main river. And then I developed this little flash to show how those lakes were disconnected from the lake. So you can see this is the lake. This is the lake that still have the natural connection with the river. And then for the development purpose, they build a sluice gate, or you could call it a regulator, to control the water between the lake and the river. Then in the lake area, they gradually build dikes and polders, and that will have to maintain the water level in that area, and then claim that area either for agriculture or for fishery. So we call this is a disconnected lake. And over the years, it's the figures show on this slide. It's massive. It's massive scale that's happening in the central and lower Yangtze, which also gradually turned into a problem. For example, this is the economic loss in the 1990s. And before the Chinese government started the new policy of wetland management, you can see the devastating flood happened in 1998, which caused about $200 billion economic loss. So from economic perspective, it was challenging. From environment perspective, most of those lakes, after being connected for decades, then the water quality really become challenging. You can understand because the disconnected lakes will gradually reduce their self-purification functions, and then with much more pollutions from all the different sources, the water quality is become a major crisis in some of the lakes. It is also about a rustic crisis because the sluice gate, for example, really destroyed the fish migration way between the river and the lakes, and also the reclamation also destroyed lots of fish spawning and breeding grounds, as well as destroyed some of the bird habitats around the lakes. And in fact, in the central Yangtze area, above 40% of the fish species they need to migrate seasonally between the lakes and the mainstream. And then we did some field survey, which shows. We did some field survey which shows the loss of the fish species in those lakes are quite significant. For example, if you see on this slide, this is the West Dongting Lake, and it's still connected with the Yangtze mainstream, and the other lakes have been controlled. You can see from a different time period, for example, around the 50s, they have a similar percentage of migratory species, but then around 2001 and 2002, the migratory species in the disconnected lakes, lost a lot, percentage-wise. But also specifically, these are the number of species. You can say number of species, disappeared from those controlled lakes, disconnected lakes. And to do so, the WWF started a project to try to, open up those sluice gates, and we organized lots of studies and organized lots of, participatory meetings with different government agencies, local communities. And finally, we opened one sluice gate for the Tianzhou Natural Reserve, which is a natural reserve for the Baiji and the Yangtze Families purpose. So that was 2004. Then after that, in 2005 and then 2006, gradually more lakes, the sluice gate for more lakes have been opened. Up to now, encouraged by this practice, up to now over 50 lakes have been reconnected seasonally with the Yangtze River Basin. And also the provincial government in this region, 4 provincial governments already take on board this practice and developed the provincial plan and also allocate financial resources from the government revenue to continue this practice, open this sluice gate seasonally. And this map shows just how the scale of the sluices. For example, on the top right, you can see people standing on the embankment. You can see the scale of the sluices. It's quite a massive scale. And what we did is try to encourage those operators to open those sluice gates seasonally, just before the flooding season, so that that will help to restore the ecological process between the river and the lake. Restoring the river connectivity, it's happening everywhere. It's happening, for example, in the U.S. through lots of dam removal exercise, and in fact, if you look at the total number in the U.S., it's over 1,000 dams have been removed over the years in the U.S. It's also happening in Europe. For example, in Spain, there's quite a few good examples in terms of take off the weirs and also small dams after the system, and then have to restore the river system. It's also happening in France. In fact, WWF also involved in lots of dam removal projects in the Loire River in France. So it's very encouraging, and also I think we would like to work with the scientist community to learn from this practice, and then how to be able to identify those opportunities to be able to restore the river connectivity. In the third area, as I mentioned, also we try to identify the opportunities how to manage and to reoperate the existing infrastructure that could release environmental flows. Again, the example that the WWF involved is to work with the Three Gorges Dam project, then be able to suggest them to include environmental flows as one of their operational objectives. Previously, the Three Gorges Dam only got 3 operational objectives. That's include the flood control, hydropower, and navigation. So through our collaboration, and we have convinced them that the environmental flow being accepted by them as the 4th operational objective, and we have been testing the flow releasing since the June 2011. According to the monitoring result, it's very positive. The fish fries happening beneath the Three Gorges Dam have been increased, from 10 to 17% since our test a couple of years ago. So these are the examples of managing the existing infrastructure. We are also exploring other opportunities. For example, how to retrofit the old dams. And a couple of years ago, we did a study with WWF Brazil to identify the dams where the new hydropower generators could be installed, and that will help to increase significantly the power generation by the existing dams. That will also help to reduce the demand for building much more new dams in the future. In the 4th area, which is more about the basin planning, how we could look at the big picture, then be able to bring the conservation and the development community together. For example, this is the cartoon developed by the scientists in TNC. And you can see on this little cartoon, on the tributary to the left, the two tributaries, there's there's conservation area, but also there's two proposed dams, which is will cause conflict. By bringing these two communities together, by bringing the conservation and development planning process, merge those two processes together, we might have the opportunity to be able to identify the new conservation areas that's in the river system. That's where, or we could also potentially identify the new site for the dam to be built, for example, along the left tributary, which has been dammed already. So we probably could find those site where could be built much more dams for the future. And then that will reduce the demand to build the dam on the tributary on the right. So by bringing the two communities together through the integrated conservation and development planning, we hopefully could look at the big picture, be able to develop the hydropower in the right place, at the same time to be able to protect the areas that are important from the biodiversity perspective. So this is the example. I think it is there's a few cases that TNC has been involved in the east part of the U.S. Try to remove a couple of small dams, then be able to build new ones on the tributary that has been dammed already. You might also heard this example in the Mekong area through the collaboration with ADB and MRC. We developed this rapid basin-wide hydropower sustainability assessment tool that could be used to assess the catchment level, the hydropower generation potentials in the future, which is also a nice way to look at the big picture, then be able to bring not only the conservation and development sectors, but also the local communities, but also the financial institutions into this planning process. Another example that WWF was involved, which is the hydropower information system for Amazon River assessment. This is the case that's led by our colleagues in WWF Brazil, and then be able to gathering all the important data regarding the species, habitats, and also ecological risks and conservation opportunities, the protected areas or indigenous people's land, and then be able to overlay this data into one system, then be able to identify which are the priority areas for protection in the future, which are the areas that can should be maintained as should be protected, potentially which also are the other areas that could allow much more development in terms of hydropower development. So this is also a very nice system. If you search Hisara on the YouTube, then there are two videos, one in Spanish, one in English. You could watch the video to explain, which explains more about this methodology. So just search the Hisara on the YouTube, you will find it. Lastly, build upon all this exercise, we also explore how can we mainstream environmental flows into global and national policies. In fact, some of the global conventions, for example, the Ramsar Convention, adopted this resolution in 2015 at its COP in Uruguay, which is largely to do with the water requirement of wetlands. So WWF Mexico and Conagua worked very closely to draft this resolution and then be able to secure the support of the parties during the COP. There are other examples, for example, the Hydropower Sustainability Assessment Protocol, which is the protocol that WWF, TNC, Oxfam, and Transparency International, we all involved, helped the International Hydropower Association to develop this protocol during the 2007 and 2011. And then this protocol has been fully endorsed by the members of International Hydropower Association. It's really become an industrial protocol for this industry. And we say this has been tested and used for more than 30 cases, I guess. And following this protocol, it's also set up specific criteria in terms of environmental flows in all the different stages of hydropower development, from early planning to management and operations. Again, in some of the countries, for example, we have been helping the Ministry of Water Resources to include environmental flow target into the major river basin plans that was developed and finalized in 2013. In countries like Mexico, we have been working with CONAGUA to identify the water reserves and to develop the Mexican national standard of environmental flows. In Kenya, again, environmental flows have been incorporated into the national laws. So there are many examples with or without the WWF's involvement. That's this concept has been gradually being mainstreamed or incorporated into the national and global policies. Probably you also heard the effort made by UK, by DEFRA, also in some of the states in the US, for example, in the Wyoming state, environmental flows have been, there's a specific, concept, state-level policies have been developed for environmental flows. If I may, put all these ideas on this flip chart, try to show, in fact, the major challenge for us is how can we really manage the impacts of the rapid development that we are facing. And, from these steps, the ideal situation would be the last, the big green step on the right, try to avoid the impact through the effort of understand, assess the environmental flows, but also through the planning that can bring the both conservation, energy, and development, sectors together. And also through certain policies and regulations, both at national level, international level, global level, but also at the basin level. And then the second, the less preferred option would be minimize the development impacts, which has lots to do with, reduce the number of the dams or reduce the height of the dams, and then be able to find opportunities, find a place to restore the connectivity of the river system, be able to practice the integrated river basin planning that bring the conservation and the development sectors together. And then for some of the project that's we can't avoid, then it's a question of how we could mitigate. And in terms of mitigation, there's loads of ways like build fish passes, restore environmental flows, manage those infrastructures so that environmental flows could be, released at least. There's also lots of discussion regarding the offset and the compensate, which WWF, we generally have a offset policy, but on the practical level, we haven't involved much in that area. But this is the area that the private sector, especially the developers, they are very, very interested on the offset and the compensation. There's also loads of examples of compensation, from different countries. I guess that's probably my my talk. Lastly, I would like to share with you a quote from a Chinese former minister of water resources. During a meeting with him, he was talking about what kinds of a healthy river looks like. So this is a quote from him. A healthy river should be clear, should be flowing. It's the home for fish where people live in harmony with water. So this, I thought this is quite inspiring. Although there's huge challenges in front of us, for better collaboration to understand the system and then be able to find innovative approach to save those rivers. Thanks for your attention. I probably would like to use the rest of the time to hear your feedback, your comment, and try to answer some of your questions. Now, by the way, WWF is a global network, as you know. We have a freshwater program in over 40 countries. Gillian, in her introduction, she mentioned already some of the mighty rivers that we have been working. I hope some of you have already known our work, or even have collaborated with my colleagues around the environmental flows or river management. And if not, it's really a good opportunity we would like to explore with you in the future, because in most of the countries, environmental flows is one of the strategic area that we will work on in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Li Feng. We really enjoyed your presentation, and I do have questions from the audience. People should feel free to continue to type in questions, and I'll get through as many as I can. The first question is, in the rivers where the dams were destroyed, how were the metal levels, in particular mercury, monitored?
Is this question about the specific river or in general?
I think in reference to any of the projects that you discussed.
To be frank, I think we only have this issue, or we encountered this issue in the Mekong, because the mercury level has been reported quite high, and also that's some scientists believe that's the decline of the Irrawaddy dolphin in the Mekong River is largely to do with the fishery, but also with the mercury level in the river system. But we don't have much more detailed information about how that was monitored, and I'm not expert on the mercury issues in the river system. But probably I could later, if someone interested, I could dig out the report which have much more information about the Irrawaddy dolphin in the Mekong, but also about the mercury level. I'm not involved in any of the specific monitoring of mercury in the river system. Sorry for that.
Next question is, if tidal power can be harnessed without using dams, what about using a similar type of turbine in rivers to harness the river power or the river flow energy without damming up the rivers? Has anyone looked at this?
Yeah, there are different engineering solutions. There are micro hydropower schemes. There are also run-of-the-river generators. Run-of-the-river generators, for those kinds of generators or dams, you don't need to build a dam. In fact, you just need to find nice locations to be able to install the generators in the river system. And also, in some cases, there's also projects that didn't really dam the entire river, but only, dam a part of the river system, be able to just, generate hydropower for the society. So yes, there are some, similar engineering solutions have been practiced.
Great, thanks. Our next question is, you've talked a lot about river flows, but less on riverine wetlands. Maintaining the amplitude of water level fluctuations is what is key for riverine wetlands. Can you talk about management actions to restore water level amplitudes in these rivers?
Yes, I think firstly it is a very important issue in terms of wetland water requirement, in terms of the dynamic water level for the wetlands or for the lakes. The example I just shared, for example, in the central Yangtze area, it's really above the flows between the lakes and the wetlands. And also in many countries, there's a specific cases try to secure enough water for the wetlands. And in the last INCO conference, we heard the examples from China try to, through the water reallocation, try to save water for the wetlands, for the lakes, be able to maintain the ecological process in the wetland systems. And there's also other examples, in the South Africa or in the US, try to, secure and then be able to relocate more water for the wetlands functions.
Great. The next question, does the hydropower sustainability assessment protocol give specific operational guidelines, and is the scientific reasoning presented for each of the quantity, timing, and quality of flows decisions?
The protocol depends on which stage you are looking at. So I mentioned the protocol covers the 3 stages. Then at each stage they are slightly, I think the assessment for the early planning stage, the assessment tool for the early planning stage is not very matured yet. It's still under development after the protocol has been endorsed. Then for the next, construction and operation and the post-dam stages, each stage got about 28-30 indicators. Those indicators covers different aspects of quality, quantity, timing, financial issues, social issues, etc., etc. Then for each of the indicator, compared to the best global practice, then you can get a score. And then basically you can get a score of about 28-30 indicators, which will give you idea in which area, which indicator it looks good, in which area the performance, or there's a room to improve the performance of the dams. So it's not as scientific as natural scientists try to use the data, try to calculate out a score, but at least it's compared to the best available practice. It's give you a sense in which area the product is performing well or is need to look at. So if you log on to the RHA website, it can give you much more details about these indicators. And also that's about 28-30 cases have been done. You could also dig after one of the assessment report, then be able to get a sense how useful it is and how the water quality, quantity, and timing issues have been addressed through the protocol.
Great, thanks. I think I'll make a couple of announcements, and then we'll see if we have any additional questions. The first announcement is about our next webinar. So if you all could mark your calendars for the February webinar, which will be Thursday, February 16th at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. You can register for it now on our upcoming webinars page. And we're also always looking for future webinar presenters and topics. So if you're interested in presenting a webinar or have a topic of interest you'd like to see us cover, please indicate this in the evaluation survey you'll receive after the conclusion of today's webinars, or contact the SWS staff at our headquarters. And then also, I'd like to remind everyone about our upcoming annual meeting, which will be in Puerto Rico from June 5th through 8th. And you can register. Registration's now open. Please visit our swsannualmeeting.org website to register. And the good news is the deadline for abstract submissions has been extended to January 25th, so there's still time to submit an abstract for a talk, and you can visit the Symposium Abstract Submission page on the meeting website for more information. Our awards committee is currently accepting nominations for Society Awards and Student Research Grant applications. If you're interested in that, please apply by February 12th, 2017, and you can visit our awards page to learn more on the website. And if you want to stay organized in 2017, we have a calendar that's available, and you can go to our website and order that online. It's only $15. And if you enjoy our annual meeting mascot, Humberto the Frog, you can follow him on Twitter at Humberto the Frog, where he'll share interesting facts about Puerto Rico and important information about the upcoming meeting. And if anybody has any last questions, they can feel free to type them in. And if not, then thank you, Li Feng, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to present the SWS webinar, and thanks to our audience for attending today. We hope that you all can join us for the upcoming webinar in February and at our annual meeting in Puerto Rico. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.